Hey, Margaret.
Yeah, Anton?
You know what people don't talk about enough?
What?
What the show could have done with Felice kissing Wilhelm. Welcome to People Don't Talk About, Young Royals. I'm Anton. My pronouns are he, they.
And I'm Margaret. My pronouns are they, them.
And we're people here to discuss the show our friends are sick of hearing us talk about.
If that sounds like you, stick around. If your friends sent you this podcast out of a desperate attempt to get you to watch Young Royals, take this as a sign.
Go watch Young Royals, then come back to this podcast.
Anton, what are we talking about today?
Today we'll be having a general discussion of Season 1, Episode 3, opening up the conversation to miscellaneous motifs, symbolism, and themes.
Woohoo! In this discussion, we won't be summarizing the plot of the episode because we already did that. If you need or want a refresher, head back 12 episodes in our feed to our most recent This Week at Hilarious for a full breakdown. This episode will likely be all over the place, so strap in. You have been warned.
Okay. I hope I didn't scare anybody too much with that opening.
I'm scared.
But what I mean
I want my mom to come pick me up.
is something that I think I might have talked about before, but I don't think I've really delved into what this could be. And this is really stretching the definition of symbolism here. But it's also thinking of this kiss as a potential symbol that doesn't get used. And on the one hand, I have really conflicting feelings about it, but also I would hate if they had done this. So I guess it's not very conflicting. I basically wrote down, just kind of off the dome, imagine what a lesser show could do with a moment like this.
It would run with it.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
and I really wrote yikes, because I remember, I think I said before that I don't really remember the first time I've seen Felice and Wilhelm kiss, because it's just something I always knew happened after the first time I watched it. And so I don't remember the first time I saw it that much, but I remember at least considering it the way I have every time I've thought about this moment, which I know you don't like to because you skip over it a lot.
I watch it. I just... Oftentimes, if I'm just watching Young Royals to feel good, I either look down because I don't understand Swedish, or I'll skip over it.
What I mean is that, yes, a lot of Young Royals fans, me included, do know there's a lot of power in Wilhelm being unlabeled.
Mm-hmm.
But Wilhelm in any way reciprocating or feeling something from a kiss from Felice, it makes for good drama, but I don't know that it makes for good story.
Yes.
Because it is, I am on record, probably on this podcast, of saying I love angst in storytelling.
Yes, you do.
But something that an initial thriving on angst and desire for angst in storytelling is what drew me to teen dramas in the first place. But something that after watching so many teen dramas you begin to tire of and can recognize from a mile away is drama for drama's sake, or angst for angst's sake.
Yeah.
A storyline that doesn't entirely complement the themes the show is working with or the direction it's going, but is there to simply hinder or halt progress for the sake of halting or hindering progress. And I'm not saying that there wouldn't, I don't think that direction for Wille and Felice's dynamic totally lacks merit, but it just isn't what I want for Wilhelm as an audience member, and would honestly make me so sad that I'd just be mad that it was happening.
It wouldn't make any sense, honestly. Like, I get it, but, like, it wouldn't have been set up, so it would have been very confusing.
Right. Very much so. And I'm not saying, like, I guess something implicit that I was realizing I wasn't actually saying is, like, when I say reciprocation from Wilhelm, I don't mean that, like, I don't mean entirely that, like, the only version of that would be that I'm envisioning would be one where Wilhelm actually has feelings for Felice romantically. What I also mean is leaning into the idea that he, like, either could have romantic feelings for Felice, or recognizing that he doesn't have any in the moment, but leaning into it anyways.
Yeah.
And then, at the simplest level, you have turned Wilhelm into the trope of the manipulative bisexual.
Yeah.
With as the most uncharitable reading. But, like, as much as some sort of confirmation that Wilhelm is definitively not monosexual, is not only attracted to guys, as much as that would be very exciting in its own way, I don't like even the implication of that coming with a manipulative tact to maintain clout and, as Eric puts it, pretends to be someone else. I think that's something we haven't really discussed when mentioning that line by Eric, is that Wilhelm doesn't take his brother's advice.
Yeah.
Really. At least for my interpretation. I think he's pretty himself at the luncheon.
I'd agree.
Like, he acts fairly earnestly and from the heart, and, like, as he just, like, and acts the way he wants. And not only would be it an extreme left turn for that to, like, happen in this for him to go back on that in this moment, but it, after just 3 episodes, that already feels inauthentic to Wille as a character.
Right, absolutely.
And that's what I'm saying, for, like, drama for drama's sake, where you would be interrupting the arc you've created for this character and, like, the internal life you've done a huge, like, a tremendous job building, just to make him stop making sense to the audience, or make him make sense in a way that, like, feels really cheap and, like, is sort of forced.
Right.
And I hate that I spent so much time on a plot point that didn't happen, but I think as we're wrapping up this episode and it's effectively, like, concluding Felice's crush on Wilhelm, the fact that is the symbolic nature of this kiss, that it ends something rather than starts something, is a sign of incredible restraint. As you were saying, a lesser show would run with this, but this show knows when to end plot lines when they no longer serve them.
Correct.
And yeah, I think I wanted to mention that up top because it doesn't really have much to do with anything, but I wanted to really just show an appreciation for that as a choice.
And we end it in a big way, because we go from Felice kissing Wilhelm to then Felice going to August's door in the same episode. So it's a hard break.
Yeah. Felice does a hard dovetail. Like, all we have to bridge those two scenes is, like, less than 30 seconds of Felice sobbing, sitting up in bed.
Yeah.
But I guess to follow the Felice train, I want to talk about a symbol that's it's kind of blink if you miss it, based on, like, a single line of dialogue, but the fact, like, the first act we see from Smee-sun when her and Felice are alone is offering her a new dress that doesn't fit Smee-sun, but she thinks might fit Felice.
Yeah.
She's literally dressing her daughter in her own old clothes.
Yep.
Like, if that's not an establishment of character from the first screen direction, I don't know what is. Like this very visual, like visceral feeling of like, I am trying to like dress you like a doll, like or at least like mold you to be like another me. And as said, like it very seamlessly flows into their conversation and isn't really addressed with much weight. But as we've said before, the fact that Felice is so casual and a little like kind of like floaty or bubbly and like smiley in that scene is its own sort of horrifying.
Mm-hmm.
Because us who have just been introduced to this character in dialogue for the first time, like, we are just sitting there like, who the fuck is this? What the fuck kind of mom are you?
Mm-hmm.
And Felice is behaving like this is entirely run-of-the-mill behavior.
Yeah,
and
like this
that's
is just another Tuesday.
Yeah, and that's just, it's disturbing and does so much for humanizing Felice's character as you realize what her normal is.
Yeah, for sure.
But I guess while we're still on Felice, we should go to horseback riding and Rousseau to kind of wrap up that aspect of the episode.
Yeah.
I know you had something written down about this, so what were your thoughts?
I just had horseback. I didn't break Rousseau up as much.
Yeah.
I just did horseback riding as a whole. But
Yeah,
horseback riding being a very strong status symbol. It's a very expensive sport. It takes a lot of time. And it seems to be something that a lot of the girls, at least in Felice's group, do. Potentially most of the girls at the school.
Yeah. And I guess that isn't necessarily thoroughly established so much so far in the show, but like using a little bit of future knowledge of the show, we can say now and with like a certain amount of like understanding that this was already always likely to be true until it was actually confirmed. Like basically everyone of Felice's friends rides.
Yeah. And so then at the lunch scene, we see Felice's mom asking Sarah about like, well, what horse do you ride? Like already assuming like, oh, you're here, you must have a horse. Mm-hmm. Not really taking into account how expensive that is, and maybe Sarah's family can't afford her own horse.
Yeah.
We already kind of fleshed that out in the previous episode, but I just wanted to bring it up again.
No, definitely. I think we talked about this in Sarah's character episode a little bit, and we definitely talked about it last week in Privileged Punishment. But something that I recognized this time, just diving deeper into like the tone of the way I perceive Smee-sun being in that scene, at the luncheon scene. She starts off with first asking Sarah about her horse, saying she's like, no, I ride Felice's horse. And Smee-sun doesn't immediately go into full on like questioning Felice mode or whatever. Mm-hmm. Because Sarah says I ride Rousseau as a simple fact, and Smee-sun says it with like a hint of interest, but to me it almost, I interpret it as a certain level of like pride in her daughter for committing an act of charity for letting this girl ride her horse. Like before Sarah describes how extensively she rides Rousseau and says, oh, it's because Felice doesn't want to.
Yeah.
I'm assuming Smee-sun is just thinking, oh, she lets Sarah ride once in a while out of the generosity of her heart.
Yeah.
And oh, isn't that just like Felice to like try to be nice to someone who is less fortunate?
Mm-hmm.
And something again that, like, not to keep throwing Felice under the bus, but something that I recognize again this time too, is that we had a chance to let this conversation go, I think, if Felice had acted just slightly smarter. And she's 16, I can't expect much more of her, but like the way that she had to stand her ground and be like, no, I ride Rousseau,
Mm-hmm.
and maintain that lie, not knowing and not having faith. She couldn't have had complete confidence that Sarah was going to maintain that lie and pick up on the cues that she was trying to send completely non-verbally, because Felice could have taken direction from her mom and found a way to make it convincing, I think, that, like, yes, Sarah does ride Rousseau, but it's not as bad as it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there was damage control that I see a potential for, that, like, Rousseau could have, like, Sarah riding Rousseau could have meant something different to at least Smison, the person who really matters in this scenario, in terms of of what she thinks it means.
Mm-hmm.
But Felice digging her heels in means that when the full truth was revealed, Smison can only see it as a betrayal by her daughter of just completely, like, lying to her and, like, and just not, and, like, letting her down ultimately, and not being who she thought she was.
Mm-hmm.
Which is in no way Felice's fault. It's entirely Smison's fault for having those expectations in the first place.
Right.
But, like, it's the way that symbol shifts in just a few lines of dialogue that really make this moment really feel like a twisting of the knife, because I do think there was a few precious moments where it could have been saved,
Mm-hmm.
and it just wasn't.
Yeah.
Which, as an audience member, is just heartbreaking a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess while we're at the luncheon, you had some stuff about the luncheon that I think is, like, generally that is good. I think, and then we can go specifically to that moment of Wille snubbing August that I wanted to talk about.
Yes. So we talked, I can't remember which was it the purple and orange when we did the day and night as a symbol?
Yes, yeah.
Do you remember
Yes.
what cycle it was? Was that 2?
Yes, it was last cycle. I'm forgetting in what context.
With
But
the,
I know
with the date? Question mark?
Yes, you're right. Because basically, for those who might not have listened to that episode or need a summary, because it was basically like 3 months ago. We talked about how in Young Royals, at least up till this point, night represents, broadly, night represents lies and facades, and night is when there is a time for revealing truth, or when, like, true feelings actually come out.
So day is the facades.
Day is facades, yes, yeah.
Yeah, so in this episode we see parents' lunch, obviously lunch during the day. And that's all everybody being like, yeah, everything is perfect, everything is great, everything is groovy. We have this facade that everything is great, even if things are maybe not great. Cough, cough, August and Simon. And then at night, Simon comes back, tells his friends what's happening, and then quite genuinely beats up August. So, like, that's just another example of all the lies being told during the day and the truth being told at night of, like, what's really going on.
No, yeah, I wrote that down too. I mean, specifically, I connected it to something that we cracked on earlier on. I think it was in Art of the Frame. I pointed out that there's 2 almost identical shots that only differ versus who is coming down the road towards Hilershka and what time of day it is.
Mm-hmm.
But right before Parents' Day, it's a line of black cars that are like the, like, Hilershka parents coming with all of their facades and like very conscious politeness. And then it's Simon, Ayub, and Rosh on Ayub and Rosh's motorbikes at night. And so like I said, it continues the theme of night is a time for revealing truth, where August reveals that he's broke, and like and Simon can fully act on all of these feelings that have been bubbling up inside him. And in the day, that's the time for when you lie and present a false face as much as you can, and as Eric says, pretend to be someone else to save face. But regarding the specific moment of Wille snubbing August at the luncheon, I think I didn't realize this until this morning, but it's the most overt Wille has changed thus far, like related to his irritation with August's influence. In front of, like, to August's face. Like, he avoids him at the initiation party, and like he's at least like, he's like badmouth August a little bit, like behind his back to Simon a little bit, or like at least like with like knowing glances and stuff like that, like with like little looks. But like in terms of like directly, like not opposing August, but like ignoring him intentionally. Yeah. Because August sees Wille look at him and then sees Wille choose not to sit by him. Right. And that is like the most that Wille has done to go against the advice of Eric in more ways than one. Like, not only is Wille largely himself at the luncheon, but in doing that, he is ignoring Eric's advice and like leaving August by the wayside a little bit, like not trusting him entirely to have like his best interest at heart, like not wanting to like sit with him, because there's Simon to sit with, and like what is going to, I think it's great setting up like what is going to pull Wille away from following basically any of Eric's like princely directions, like than the presence of Simon.
For sure. Something that I was thinking about this morning is this Wilhelm picking Simon over his family for the first time? In a very like broad strokes kind of way.
In a really broad strokes kind of way, like you can argue for that it being symbolic of that. It's actually for the ways that like we've really established in the first two episodes, in the first two cycles, how much August is a stand-in for the royal family when they're not there. Like we have Eric in this episode too, but it is because of Eric. Yeah, and it is because of Eric that like Wilhelm goes down to the luncheon in the first place. But if you really look at it, like Wille isn't following Eric's advice beyond him telling him, "Oh, go to Simon," which is something that Wilhelm probably secretly wanted to do anyways. Right. Or like realizes he wants to do as soon as he gets there. Like there's a moment of indecision, and I think it's that indecision that's symbolic more than anything, because it is not nothing, but it also gets resolved pretty fast, which I think goes along with what we've been talking about this episode, which is like Wilhelm getting over himself quicker than one might expect because of the strength of his feelings. Yeah. Which then necessitates almost, in order to keep the theming consistent, a ramping up of stakes and the extreme intensification of the pressure on Wilhelm, because he's already kind of like, he's found a way to navigate and almost already overcome or at least start to overcome the pressures of what being just Prince of Sweden and being the spare does to his sense of like his own sexuality and what is the way forward to being happy and true to himself. Yeah. So then the road has to get infinitely harder, so that indecision can come back with vengeance.
And boy, oh boy, does the road get harder.
No spoilers, but boy, oh boy, does it.
Well, Eric dies.
Right.
That's not a spoiler. That happens this episode.
Exactly. But like, just what we're saying, we're not going to say how it gets harder, because that's not relevant to this episode.
But no, it's not. But, your brother dying makes stuff hard.
Oh, yeah. And I guess, all right, I'm just thinking we have two. I at least have two things left. I don't know if you have anything more.
I have one thing.
Okay, what is your one thing?
Well, it's right at the end of the episode, so if you want to say your other thing first, you can. But if not, I can do it.
Yeah. Yeah. You do your thing, and then we can finish out with like Simon and Purple and like my one other thing.
Okay. So my last thing that I wanted to talk about was, so we always see Simon and Wilhelm together when they're either completely alone, like in the music room, or at night, like last episode with them going around Simon's hometown into Rosh's game.
Yeah.
However, at the end of this episode, we see them together during the day, and there's a bunch of people around. And that's the first time we really see that out in the open in front of anybody. And then it also gets immediately squashed.
Yeah. I feel like I keep saying that, like, like Wille has been making like the first few steps on like a journey of acceptance, yada yada yada. And I didn't even realize that like the image I always have in my head of that is literally represented symbolically in the episode of going down the steps of Hilershka and going to leave Hilershka to go to Simon's house.
Mm-hmm.
Like he literally does get a few steps away from Hilershka and then gets pulled straight back.
Yeah.
And I guess staying on Wille and Simon to kind of say with like there weren't really tons of Wille and Simon like symbols in this episode like there were last episode because they were a little bit more divided. Well, not their storylines were more divided.
Mm-hmm.
They as people were not divided for super long. But I wanted to talk about the opening piano scene because I hope this makes sense, but piano scenes are so fucking gay. Affectionate.
You did not have that in your notes. I was not expecting that.
No, that was off the dome. That was thought of. That was thought of while I was writing this, but I decided I didn't want to write it down because I didn't know if I was actually going to say it. And then in the moment, I decided I was.
Okay, keep going. I'm recovered.
You get what I mean, though, right?
I do.
Right? Because I don't know how to just any of our like straight listeners who don't get what I mean, I don't know how to explain it more. And queer listeners who don't get what I mean, I hope you can think about it a little bit longer and get what I mean. I don't know what else to say other than like
I think it's just very intimate.
Yes. I think it goes along with it's a little bit riskier and a little bit more tender version that progresses beyond what we talked about extensively last cycle, which was the bro tap.
Yeah.
Of like the most amount of contact you can really have outside of like a sports context with another guy that cannot be construed wrong, at least in like a Western context.
I agree.
And now like teaching someone a song on the piano and kind of like either accidentally or purposely or not, like covering your hands with theirs.
Yeah.
Or in any way, like sharing a seat on like a musical instrument, but especially like a piano, like that's a level of like touching and like intimacy and like a connecting moment that like is not always gay, but when the impression is already there or when like it's already starts being implicit,
yeah,
it is the most unspoken but obvious thing ever.
Yes, I agree.
And in its own way, beyond like connection and intimacy, the difference in skill between them of Simon, who's only ever learned piano by ear, and Wilhelm, who is probably classically trained just because of being a prince.
Yeah, because why not, you know?
Right. I mean, it's very classic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, granted, like the pianoforte was more often like a female instrument, but like there were also male pianists. So, historically, like most composers ever have been pianists. So like the fact that Wilhelm, I mean, he didn't like teach Simon how to read music, but like he helps bridge this gap, this knowledge gap that like becomes an issue that I've literally never thought about it this deeply before, but I'm realizing this is another thing like we were talking about last time of these like invisible barriers that Haleshka has up that they don't recognize are entirely class-based, which is like, granted, like you can learn music pretty frequently, but like music lessons are like less of a common thing. They're a paid thing more often than not. And so like the fact that Simon, as a person of middle class to lower middle class, is just a person who just like is a musician but never learned how to read music, it does make a certain level of sense. And the fact that his choir classes presume that everyone who's in them will be able to learn their parts by knowing how to read music.
That's true. I never thought about that. I thought about like, oh, he can't read sheet music, but I wasn't like, oh, wait a minute. He's in choir. He has to learn his part and his notes.
Yeah, because that's what he's doing. Is he's learning the school song for a choir performance. Yeah, and I mean, I'm probably making this connection because I haven't mentioned before, one of the many reasons why this show is made for me is that I am deeply and forever and always a choir kid, and like a huge matter of accessibility that my best directors who've like actually been able to have like the time to do this have done is they put parts into into a music software and like send us recordings, or they link us YouTube videos like of the songs we're doing. But the fact that like the school song split by parts, like that won't just naturally exist on YouTube somewhere for Simon to listen to and learn by himself. Right. And so the teacher would have had to have done the work of knowing that like, or thinking about the fact that not everyone in your choir knows how to read music. Like, not everyone in your choir is even going to recognize the difference between the soprano and the tenor part. That's something also that like that kind of gets glossed over. But like, Simon was trying to play the soprano part because it was the melody. It was probably the closest thing he was closest to getting, but that like wasn't the part that he was trying to learn or should have been trying to learn. Yeah. And so, like, I don't know. It again shows the ways in which like Wilhelm, without really thinking about consciously about what he's doing, like in a much more graceful way than asking like, oh, you have lunch with us? And then Simon getting defensive in their very first meeting, being like, well, we have to eat. So non-boarders have to eat. So this time it's like, oh, you don't read sheet music? And Simon's being kind of like bashful and being like, no, I don't. And Wilhelm being like, well, let me teach you. Like it's this like very much more not conscious at all, but very like deliberate in the sense that like he doesn't think about it. He doesn't like waffle about it. Like he's just like, well, Simon doesn't know how to read sheet music. A great way of keeping this interaction going is, oh, well, I can show you. Like, yeah, it just makes my music minor heart very happy, and my choir kid heart especially just go kind of a little crazy at being like, oh my gosh, I get what's happening here and why it's so special. And to conclude, we should talk about the titular symbol that we always come back to. The what? The color titular symbol, like related to the title of Purple and Orange. Yeah.
Titular.
Yeah. Titular. And and that is Simon and the color purple in his clothing. In the piano scene, is he wearing purple or is that shirt like red? Because like dark red. Because
I think it's red.
Okay.
Hang on.
That makes a whole lot of sense. I couldn't really tell. I was doubting myself. I wanted to make sure.
Helps if you spell the name of the show right. Here we go.
That does.
I think it's red. Okay.
Yeah. All right. So that's out of the running, unfortunately. Like, I would have loved to have purple in the piano scene, but like I also get that like it's a scene that doesn't end well, and so it honestly add insult to injury. If Simon was wearing purple in that scene.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would.
Like, rarely is Simon ever like walking away angry or really disappointed when he's wearing purple. Like, most of the purple scenes are ones that like you can flag as being like wholesome.
Yeah. Well,
like, or at least like touching in that like they don't end terribly.
Yeah, like they're not angry at each other when they walk away.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I mean. And then unfortunately, something that I feel like I don't focus on Simon's clothes until we get to this episode at the end of the cycle. But then I'm like, oh, he's wearing his uniform for all of Parents' Day, which means we get no purple content for all of those lovely luncheon scenes. But the day that Eric's death comes out, he's wearing a purple overshirt, which is the first time I feel like that's happened.
Mm-hmm.
So our boy's being bold and obvious.
Yes.
You hadn't picked up on the purple already, which I know a lot of people don't, probably casually watching the show, but like it gets really obvious. But then, similar to what you were talking about, like with the end of the episode, like to an extent, like he puts a jacket on over that purple overshirt when they would leave it or going to when Simon and Wille leave to go to Simon's house. But it's still a purple overshirt, which means the purple is still so visible, which I take as he's concealing his feelings, but not well.
Right. I also take it that way.
Like, you can still see a lot of purple. So, as I said, he's still being bold and obvious. And then I guess the one exception to the thing I just said is that Wilhelm is brought back inside by Boris when Simon is wearing purple. So it does end a little bit sadly, but like their relationship is their dynamic is solid in terms of like that's where we get the all the smiling at each other and the fucking heartbreaking joy on both their faces.
Yeah.
And with that, thank you for listening.
Jesus Christ.
If you'd like to keep up to date with when we release new episodes and other pod-related announcements, you can check out our Instagram or our threads at People Don't Talk About. Our next episode will be This Week in Hilarska for Season 1, Episode 4. But be on the lookout for bonus episodes coming up during the month of March. For those of you who are listening to this way, way after the fact, this cycle is coming right up, as you might have seen from other bonus episodes in the feed, right before the third and final season of Young Royals comes out very soon.
Yes.
So if it wasn't already probably obvious without us saying it, we're going to be taking a bit of a break to, crazy as it sounds again, like consume the remainder of this show that we're discussing on this podcast. And come back on episode 4 when we feel like we have fully processed the show in its entirety, which won't be too long. Like, we won't.
It's not going to be months.
Still probably. No, we'll probably still come back at you by the end of March, but before March ends. Mm-hmm. But like beginning of March, middle of March, first 2/3 of March, we'll get some bonus episodes out, maybe. But also we probably want to save some bonus episodes, at least one, for to pair with This Week in Hilarska for the next cycle.
Also, the finale and the like making of the last season comes out the day before our 1-year anniversary of recording our very first episode.
because that comes out also on the day of the day the last episode drops.
Yeah, the finale and the documentary.
Yeah.
Because we recorded the first This Week of Hilarska on March 19th of last year.
Yeah, which it's unless we get an official trailer for the documentary, we probably won't do a reaction to that trailer, but we definitely will be doing a bonus episode about the documentary.
Yeah.
In any event, so stay tuned. And with that, all that's left to say is
let's start a revolution, baby.